Hello everyone. So I am Ria. I am the editor at Bound India, and today we are going to be talking to Mr. Vivekanand Selvaraj. He's a poet and a diplomat who is based in um, Beijing, and he writes both in Tamil and in English. So today we're going to talk to him about his newest poetry collection called CogVerse. So just give me a second and I will invite him onto this live. Hello.
Hello,
Hi Vivekanand, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, yeah, now I great. Hi. How's it going?
Yeah, it's okay. Uh, it's usually busy, so weekends are good.
Weekends are great, yeah, because usually like we're just having a little bit to read, a little bit to write. So I was just telling everyone about you before you came on. So I would just like to, before we go into discussing Cogverse and, the specifics and nitty-gritties of the poetry collection and how you came up with it, maybe um, would you like to like tell our followers and everyone who has joined us live, maybe a little bit about yourself, like how did you start writing poetry, the whole backgrounds of it. What interested you in poetry as an art specifically, apart from like fiction, non-fiction, etc.?
Mm, yeah, actually, one way to say that is like the fundamental point where CogVerse starts is also a way of addressing why I started writing.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, ends with that note, ends on that note. Um, but if I have to be, bit chronological and clear about why I started writing, I think I was always reading, and I felt that it was a natural thing to start writing. Maybe in class 9, I was writing something like doggerels in my mother tongue, Tamil.
Mm-hmm.
Later, uh, actually, I started writing poetry in a serious way when I started college. I was doing my medical college, and then I used to wait for the bus on weekends. I mean, on weekdays to go back to college. I used to buy a literary magazine in the bus stand, and
Right.
I never understood any of those poems. And I was reading something about negative capability, where something that you don't understand makes you work harder towards understanding it, and in that effort, there is some kind of a movement. So that's how I started. Like I was like, why can't I understand this poem? And the words, the vocabulary is not beyond my reach. I could understand all the words, but the way they
Mm.
were arranged, it didn't make any sense to me.
Right.
And I kept reading, and reading without understanding anything, because there was a sense of beauty in it. I could sense that the mystique and the way the language operated in those poems made me very curious, and I was trying to do some of that myself. But it was a long journey, so as to say, because I think I was still writing very maybe romantic sort of poems, in the sense of romantic in sense of language,
Right.
uh, rather than what I'm writing right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I started, and somehow I started feeling like writing was not it's not like a different pursuit, or it's not like part of my life. Like it was something that I did to make sense of my own life. It
Mm.
was it is an integral part of my life, and I don't see it like uh, a facet or identity or anything like that. I think it's natural for people whoever is writing. Yeah.
that's how you started writing, like poetry. That's how you got into sort of the whole. Was just a way for sort of self-exploration, maybe in a way, as far as I'm understanding it.
Yeah, you can say that. Yeah, I mean, if you can put a tag like that.
I mean, not a really maybe focused exploration of the self, because that's what I understood while reading CogVerse as well. You don't really focus on your inwards as much, like a lot, as you focus on the relationship between your sort of understanding with what is happening around you. So you don't approach, like you don't take a narcissistic viewpoint to what is happening within me. I need to explore it through poetry, because a lot of times whatever poetry I have read as well, they sort of take that approach that I need to understand what's going with me, inside me, anything, and I need to write poetry to sort of explore that part of myself. But while reading your book, I felt that you had an acute sense, an acute understanding, and it affected you a great deal. Like more than maybe you cared to put in words. Like I think I could understand that sort of intensity through your poetry as a reader, through the kind of topics you tackled, through the overall themes of the book as well. So, talking about themes, maybe if you could tell me a little bit about how you weave the sort of parts in the book. So there are four parts in the book, and that's sort of like a journey which ends with one part, which is rebellion, which is titled Rebellion. So if you could tell me a little bit about like the four parts of the book and how they tie to each other, like maybe a little bit about how the voice in each differs and is yet sort of tied to the same theme that you've tried to put across, maybe.
Uh, so the four parts actually don't flow linearly, but there is a connection. There is something that binds all of them. The title kind of explains that connection. Basically, all of them are CogVerse, but one of them is actually titled CogVerse. So I would like to say how I actually wrote these different parts.
Mhm.
Uh, Putting them all in one book was actually an editing process. I didn't sit down to write four parts.
Right.
That's not how it happened. Some of those poems are written way back, like 10 years back. Some of them still like a few months before the book was published. So they are not chronologically arranged. So when I actually sat down to compile the book or did an anthology of it, I was talking to a friend, Anis, who was like, you are talking too many things and there is no coherence. So then we were like, how do I arrange it? Then I started cutting down poems which didn't fit in at all. Then I realized actually there is something else in the collection, that most of the poems talk about a certain thing. So then I cut down everything, cut down all the fat, and then I realized then there are things that needed to be added. That's how
Hmm.
I ended up writing at least two segments, which I realized that needed to be written. So to be lucid about the four parts, the first part is called Butterfingers. It was a separate poem I had originally written. Uh, it was a set of 20 poems. Each of them are like two or three lines, and they don't have separate titles. They actually were originally written like bullet points, one, two,
Right.
three, and then I reformatted them later. But when I wrote them, it was more about understanding my a sort of trauma, which is I wouldn't say I don't want to um, say that it was like a writing about trauma, but it was more like what I understood about trauma in general and about my own self. So there was like 20 bullet points I wrote as a poem. I titled it as Butterfingers. Then the second about the 20 bullet points, the Butterfingers talk about how a person um, in connection with his environment gets impressed by his environment, and it's also affected by it. So some of those memories are very based on my very early childhood, like image of my father sharpening my pencils for class, things like that. All of them actually talk about how a person's freedom is curtailed, not just by oppressive behavior, but also oppressive behavior in the sense hierarchies, organizations, but also by love, uh, also by well-meaning actions, well-meaning behavior from your loved ones. All these things somehow affect a person and his psyche and his independence, his own self-confidence. So Butterfingers, as you know, is a epithet for a person who is not good with his hands. Used to be called Butterfingers by my craft teacher, and it stayed with me.
Right.
Yeah, so that was the part. That is more like a, would say, like a, there is a word called hip hop montage, right, in
Yes.
movie. Yeah, so it's like jump cuts of 5 seconds, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Butterfingers is like that. If you read Butterfingers, actually you would actually not need to go through the entire book. Butterfingers has all of the parts
Mhm.
in it. In the
Mhm.
CogVerse, on the other hand, is more like a theoretical explanation or theoretical understanding of how a cog operates in the world. So there are no names in CogVerse. CogVerse only has actions, images, but they also their protagonist is the cog, or the protagonists are the cogs. There are only cogs there. There are names. So there, it's a set of 10 poems I wrote last year, 2021, start of 2021. All of them were written inside a span of a week. After I wrote
Mhm.
CogVerse, after I finished writing CogVerse, I realized that they actually belong in the book. Until then,
Mhm.
I didn't realize that. Originally, I wrote them as the machine. Then I retitled them as CogVerse. So the second part is actually uh, an exploration into a cog's life, uh, and that
Mhm.
and that doesn't only talk about the binaries of an individual and the world. It also talks about how an individual actually derives a lot from his own meaning from the system.
Mhm.
While he is also rebelling against the system, the individual also derives a lot of meaning, his own identities from the system. So I was trying to be objective with CogVerse. I don't know how much of a success it was. Third part is the most free-flowing segment, which is called Sudandhiram Vurdappa, right? Yeah. It was actually the name of my own Tamil collection, which came out the year before. But beyond that, the English title, I've used the English title, which is Freedom is a Box. It's derived from a song called Sudandhiram Vurdappa, which is the same. It means the same. Freedom is a box.
Mhm.
And this is actually a very, it's like a rant where there it's mostly free verse, but I've also taken liberties with the format. I've used many forms because some of those forms reflect the places I've been through, like the medical college. I've used case sheets as a form. I've used police reports as a form. I've used um, and there is another segment I've used um, enquiry as a form, and later in the rebellion I've used the dialogue theater as a form because I also I'm interested in theater. I've written like 7 or 8 plays, small ones. So all these things came about, and journals. So all these experiments with the way what I was writing happened in this part, but it also talked in a very unhindered way about what I was going through,
Mhm.
and there was connections between the poems. There was more of a connection between each of the poems when you go through this segment, and the last segment is more like a denouement. Third and fourth segments actually flow into each other. Third flows into the fourth. It's not like a airtight difference. So the fourth segment is basically tying up of different uh, uh, complexities into a not. It's not neat, but still some sort of tying together of loose ends. So
Correct.
all the 6 poems in Rebellion somehow connect to a different aspect. There is probably a poem about the medical college. There's probably a poem about the childhood. There is also one thing about my current thing, and yeah, it's like that. So every poem in Rebellion is an attempt to finish the whatever I have opened in segment 3, maybe segment 1. So all these four operate in a way that if you read them in one go, you will get some connections which you would not otherwise get.
Right, right. So, a question that I had while reading CogVerse was that, as you said, there is a lot going on in the book. Even when you sort of like edited it, formed it into like coherent parts in the book, that maybe the first and the last part are independent entities, and the third and the fourth part sort of flow into each other. So, why was there this conscious decision to sort of write these poems as parts? Like, the question that I have is, would they have been better as individual parts, like individual poetry collections maybe, or what was the what was the sort of aim, what was your aim in tying all of these parts together? Because there is your childhood that you talk about, there is your relationship with the environment, with the system. You also touch upon, a lot of maybe toxic masculinity and how we are sort of parts of the system. We are rebelling against the system that we are a part of. So we are trapped in this so endless conundrum, so to speak, is what I gathered as well from the book. Then you talk about your relationship with, your ancestry. Then you touch upon nostalgia. And in the end, you sort of finish it off, like you give it some closure by using poetry as a form, as rebellion in itself. So, what was this decision to tie all of these different, like widely different parts together into one whole, like one sort of cog? Could they have been functioning as different cogs? Could they have been different books?
Uh, I'm not sure now. Maybe 2 years back, I could have asked that question. But the part 3 was actually written as a long poem
Mm-hmm.
of 5 pages. When I first wrote it, the first draft that I wrote it was in 2020. I wrote it like as a single segment, single poem, which was like 20 pages, like 20 poems, I think. Then some of the other poems in part 3 were written, though that is the part which has like really old poems. Like there are poems about my ancestry which are really, some of them are really old.
Right.
But why I added them into the mix was that because the 20-page poem that I wrote, which I had mentioned, had also a few bits about ancestry. Then I realized
Hmm.
that these actually unconsciously talk to each other. When I sat about editing it, I realized, okay, I've written like something here. I've also written something else about this before. So I took that and then I rewrote them, and then realized that they actually belong. Like, there is this guy called Guillermo del Toro, as the director, right?
Guillermo del
Yeah, the guy who directed Shape of Water. Is it the same guy,
Yes,
right?
it's the
Yeah.
same.
So, yeah. So he had once said this thing, and I actually kind of I don't know which happened first, but he actually said that all the things that I'm doing is the same thing. All the movies
Hmm.
that I'm making is actually the same thing. I actually realized that for a few years I was writing some of those things, and I probably felt like one poem I write in 2012, and then and 17 I write something similar or something related to that. Uh, I don't think they're two different things. They're probably incomplete versions of the first poem talking to the other one. So I realized that the biggest leverage that an editor has is to approach these material from a completely different point of view, not just as a guy who responded to the moment, but
Mm-hmm.
as a guy who look back at something in a very objective way. So the guy who edits and the guy who writes are sometimes not the same person. So when I was editing it, I realized that there was more connection between the different parts. And now that I think of it, I don't think I could have put them out as different books at all. For
Right.
example, like I said, I wrote the 10 poems of CogVerse. I also had in Beijing, I had uh, given it to like 10 people who we had a small workshop of sorts, and I gave my drafts for comments. So people read all of them at one go, and I got their feedback. And then I suddenly realized, like, whatever I have done here, while the conversation was happening, whatever I have done here in this segment belongs in a larger book
Hmm.
where there uh, so if you read CogVerse, it actually makes it is full of aphorisms. It doesn't. It is actually very preachy in a way. But if you just put them out as 10 preachy poems, they kind of are very odd, like a sore thumb or something. But if you put them in a larger work which talks about similar concerns, then they have a certain like they become parts of a puzzle,
Right.
and they
So they have
just
some kind of context.
yes, they actually make more sense
Hmm.
because it's a guy who writes this and that, and from different moods and from different times and different perspectives, but actually what you're saying is the same thing. And
Right.
I see there is any logic in putting them out as different works. I can make 4 books, and I think that will be only a statistic.
Hmm. Fair. So one more sort of thing that I wanted to ask you was the thing that struck me the most while reading the book was the format in which you've written a lot of these poems. So you said that you've written a lot of, like in the third collection probably, as police reports, as inquiries, as a part of a scene, as a dialogue. So why did you why did you have like this mix of um, formats? If you had a choice, which format would you take and run with? And if you didn't, like what was that thought process behind choosing multiple of these formats? And these, formats like they're very bureaucratic. A police report, like a proper inquiry. It's a very bureaucratic format. So what was your thought process behind choosing these kinds of formats, especially when you're writing about like your experiences in medical school and all of that?
Yeah, yeah. There was a thought process there. I had been writing poetry for a quite long time, actually, in a way that my first Tamil poem, which was published in a literary magazine, uh, was 2009 or maybe 2008. When I was in college, I was an intern, and one of my poems got published. And then back then, I was actually very focused on understanding how people write poems. So it was more like me trying to be copycat of other poets. And then I realized
Hmm.
there is always a certain format. Even when you are calling it as a free verse, there is always a certain effort to channel text into a certain grammar.
Hmm.
Even while professing that you are free verse
Writing.
or postmodern, whatever. So, and I realized that I'm trying to put 4 lines. Back then, there used to be a joke like, what is poetry is basically a sentence written down in 4 lines, a single sentence broken down into 4 lines, which don't really make sense.
Hmm.
But if you write in 4 lines, then they look like a poem. That is how many of the people around me looked at a poem. But then when you actually go through life, go through motions, you realize that uh, there is an organic uh, beauty about language,
Hmm.
whichever vessel it is poured into. So I am a bureaucrat. I trained as a doctor, and I am a guy who consumes fiction a lot. I like mystery. I like movies. So all these things are actually bound together in one way or other by text.
Hmm.
So there is a certain beauty. Why do we think poetry is different from fiction? Now that we have liberated the poetry from the constraints of um, meter and rhyme, then what does poetry have, which is inherently beautiful and different from fiction, which is ultimately you would come to some sort of an understanding that poetry is something that kind of stills you, it's immediate, and it is an end in itself. All that actually happens to you in daily life.
Hmm.
You also see the beauty of your everyday text, your report. You also see people make mistakes, people being indifferent when they write bureaucratic reports, and that indifferent, when you look at it from a perspective, when you put a, when you are like a panopticon or something, and you look at that text, and then you look at like how callous, how indifferent, and how much effort goes into that indifference
Right.
sometimes. And that actually, when that perspective is also poetry. So I wanted to bring that forms out, because some of those things I don't think I would have any other way of writing it, like the journal of a medical college student. Like, he
Hmm.
goes to the ward and he sees three different patients. All of those guys are real, and the date is like something like, I had to go through, I went back in time and then saw the calendars, and I kind of got the really approximate timelines down there. Like, it was, if it was October, it was actually October. I don't know the right date when it happened, but I was trying to be as subjective as possible. I actually read the books again and found out what actual treatments were given. But the point is, like, how else do you write that?
Right. 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 I mean, um, I think it kind of is a little similar to all of these tropes that we might have in poetry, in fiction, in non-fiction, like a lot of tropes that might be different through the way they're treated. So what I understand is your treatment of the understanding of, like, things that were happening around you and things that you experienced was what um really made it like effective. I think the format played a really important role in bringing that sort of callousness and that indifference to the front, is what I am understanding. Because when I read those poems, like when I read those things in that format itself, I think I understood what you were sort of trying to mean. There is still a little bit, gap in what the poet tries to mean and the reader tries to understand, like with the treatment, with the text, because poetry is that subjective. But yeah, I think what you said, I sort of like have seen it in a lot of free verse as well, which is why poets are very comfortable using free verse and sort of channeling their own formats into it. Even the some poems you have sort of written like steps going down and then steps going down back. You know. So that was very interesting for me. It sort of came across to me as a journey as a reader. I don't know what you intended to do.
You're talking about
Uh,
sorry to interrupt.
no, no,
Please
it's
go on.
okay.
Uh,
Please.
yeah, are you talking about the poem where about my grandfather? Uh, it goes like circles, kind of.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So yeah. So that was actually he the whole, it has a story in it in itself. So basically, he was 13 years old and he started doing business in the World War times, and he was basically doing this day in day out, right? So
Mhm.
when you, so if
So
you go, yeah, go down the plane, uh, basically take oranges from the mountain and then go down and sell them in the plains, and then take the money, come back, do that, take the money, come back, get the oranges. I mean, it's a cycle, it's an endless cycle. So the first time I wrote, it was a single loop. Then I was talking
Mhm.
to one of my uh, she actually said, why don't you repeat it 3 times? How would that sound? I tried it and actually thought it was, I liked it, so I kept it that way.
Right.
But it actually gives very jarring sensation to somebody who reads, like, okay, this is like a daily rigmarole, and that actually made some uh, that actually had some outcome, economic outcome in the real sense. But if you don't write it 3 times, if you don't do it again and again, you don't really appreciate the amount of routine involved in it. The routine is what I want to do there.
Yeah. I think that is one of the things that I like about reading free verses as well, because it relies on a lot of play within the words to sort of convey what you're trying to get across instead of just putting words across in a straight line. With this sort of poetry, you can also structure it physically in a way that you can get your point across to the reader much more lucidly, as probably you have. So that was one of the things that I really liked. And the last, I think, question that I would like to ask you is what was what was the most difficult, I think, aspect of putting all of these poems together? Because as you said, you have written them in like various timelines. All of these you didn't begin writing them as your effort to conceive them into a whole. These have been taken from across the years. So, what was the most difficult aspect of putting these together and sort of forming that journey through these four collections, having a story with all of your poetry spread across the years?
I don't know whether it was difficult. It was quite necessary, I felt, because it didn't happen overnight. I was doing it for a very long time. In fact, when I actually set out to, I think a lot of things changed while the moment of starting the editing process and where I ended. So much actually happened in my life as well. And so it was, in parts, I think I was also reading it uh, in a very different way. So it was I also discovered it, so as to say. By the time I finished writing it, I realized it. I realized that I could not have conceived it otherwise. It was more like, how do I say it? So when I actually the first time I actually thought I should put together an anthology was when I had like uh, 50 decent poems, and then I thought, okay, maybe I should put them together as one book, because I frankly don't think I can write a lot, and maybe I'll get one book out, put my
Hmm.
name, uh, you know, into the wind or something, then at least go on with my life, things like that. And then when I actually started putting them together, I kind of uh, trashed like 50 of them. I had only 10 left, and then I went. I had a workshop, which I kind of acknowledged also in the book, by Nandini and Manjari Indurkar, Nandini Dar and Manjari Indurkar, uh, where I kind of realized a lot of perspectives about my own life, which I was not acknowledging to myself, like seeing your own home in a different light, seeing how you have been in your own home. You want to talk about other things, but actually you were refusing to talk about certain things, like who is cooking in your house. Like, have you ever tried to cook in your house? And
Hmm.
you realize that those things, you even if you write, you don't really address them.
Yeah.
uh, it kind of changed me. It was just like taking you're sitting in a room and you think that it is your world. um, then somebody comes and says, like, this wall that you have, it's actually not real. The
Yeah.
room is actually there. And then they put on a light, and then you realize this wall was just a reflection. It's not even a glass wall. Then you realize that everything, you're not even sitting in the corner of the room, you're sitting in the center of the room. It's like that. And it kind of changed the way I wrote, and I felt like I started writing even more. So then in no time I had more material. Then I was like, even before I started editing my first book, I had material for 3 books.
Wow.
Uh, I, I have I think I have now 3 different ideas, and 3 different ideas in the sense like I have collections of poems which could actually go into 3 books. But I don't want to rush them, because when I actually sat down to edit, uh, they uh, it was another rediscovery, and I really loved that journey of rediscovery. I wouldn't
Hmm.
say it's difficult, because it made more sense to me. It was like, it was something that I will always look forward to. It was always running like a what is that? In the phone, you have some apps which are running in the background, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The back tabs that never closed. Like, so they were always running in the back of your head. And something
Hmm.
would happen as, okay, this is that. And then you go back and, the Word document that you were working on, you change the order and change the
Yeah,
sequence. I don't think I can repeat it. I don't think there is a system here. I think it was just the way of how your own daily life was interacting with what you had written, and then how you rewrite stuff, and sometimes how much you can actually understand about your own, how to actually justify your text in Word document. From
right,
that onwards, like small words, like you
right.
learn about editing. All these things actually kind of helped, and actually the conversations with friends, a lot of friends, all of whom I have acknowledged in um, uh, the first page, uh,
Yeah.
they actually did, it was not that they were just looking at the final product and gave me like 5 points each. Some of those conversations go way back. They like, okay, I mean, those conversations do help. Like, there was one poem which in CogVerse, it was like 10 lines, and one friend suggested that I only keep the first two, cut 8 lines. It was hard. It was just a suggestion, and she was like, "Okay, just an idea. How does that look?" I thought of it, and then I actually cut that down, and then let it be. After 3 days, then I read it. I thought what she said made more sense, and
Hmm.
the choice of cutting down was still with me. But when you actually cut down, then you learn more about it, more about writing. Sometimes you don't accept a comment, or you overrule that. I mean, all these things taught a lot of things to me. A lot of I don't know how to say it actually.
So, like, I'm sorry, like, this was supposed to be the last question, but I'm very curious. So, when you said that, a lot of things in our daily life sort of impacted that poetry and how we rewrite it, how you rewrote it, how you edited your poems, because most of them were about your connection with, things that are happening around you, how you see them, how they affect you and all of that. At what point did you think and say that, okay, now this is the final sort of relationship that I want to portray with whatever is happening in the poem, in my environment, whatever. This is the final, this is the answer that I want to sort of come to, because as you said, it's a very continuous process, and how you view your surroundings and how they impact you change quite often. So, at what point did you think that, okay, I should stop at this point, and maybe this is the change that I need to portray, because obviously after that a lot of things might have changed, as well.
Actually, the last segment, the originally when I had I had 3 parts. Uh, the Butterfingers and Cogverse were actually a natural fit. The moment I wrote Butterfingers, I kept it aside. I mean, I didn't think about it much. Then the third part was what I was working on for the most of my uh, time editing. Then I realized the third part can become 2 parts, third and fourth. The moment I did them, the moment you realize that the last segment is becoming the last segment, then the book was actually coming to a close. Then I also tried something else which didn't work out, but it worked out in a different way. Like, if you see, the segments from Butterfingers keep repeating throughout the book.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know how I did that. Where did it start that process? But the moment that happened, the book finished itself. Uh,
Right.
because I realized that uh, um, okay, now I actually, if you see, the book is like 90 pages, 80 pages, but there are only 45 poems in it.
Hmm.
The 45, and none of the poems are actually more than one page, but still it
Hmm.
became eight. And that's because some of these poems actually repeat themselves in different places. And actually, when you talked about how these four parts interconnect, and that's because how Butterfingers interacted with other three segments.
Right.
CogVerse is the only airtight segment. There is no interaction. There is no interruption in CogVerse because
Hmm.
it's a voice. It's not the same guy. He has no name. He has no details. He has no specifics. He is a guy who talks about it's like that. It's like a documentary about a planet or something,
Yeah.
our planet or something. Like you talk about something, 10 poems on a phenomenon, and then there is no detail in it. There is just some theory. It's like theory, and the rest of them is like practical or something like that. But Butterfingers interacts with the every other segment, particularly the third segment, and the way it interacts. For example, there is one poem. Um, So there is this poem which is the night before he was to become a giant insect. Gregor Samsa tells the insurance agent to burn all his life's work. Instead, he is turned into a perverse memory. This is part of Butterfingers, but it repeats just before the police report on disturbances at Mr. V's residence. In that segment, you come to know that Mr. V has actually lost his mind or something and has become a complete different person. It's almost at the end of this segment. So,
Hmm.
and also, it also talks about Kafka's last days almost. But we don't use the word Kafka. Instead, we're saying it's Samsa, right? So the author has become the most famous protagonist he has created, and it is at
Yeah.
the end. If you just don't repeat this part from Butterfingers in this page, uh, actually there is something missing.
Hmm.
Uh, the narrative of segment 3 is kept alive only by the fact that Butterfingers is there. And actually, to
Right.
answer the previous question, that is why I could not have written them as separate books,
Hmm.
because they actually fit each other.
Right.
And that
Right.
is not a very conscious one. Like I said, everything that you do somehow relates to the fundamental unsolved parts of your life or the fundamental repeating themes of your life. If you actually need to explore them in detail and do justice to them, I think you have to take your own voices at different points of time and probably make them as two different people and talk to each other. Maybe you will learn more about yourself.
Right. Right. Well, this was a very, very insightful live about like your collection as well and your approach to poetry and your thoughts as a poet in general. And I really enjoyed, talking to you and listening to you. And I have enjoyed reading CogVerse as well. I think I've read it a lot of times by now. I think in these few months. And before going to everyone who joined the live, thank you for joining and thank you for listening to whatever we spoke about um Vivekanand's collection, CogVerse, which is available on Amazon as an ebook and as print, so you can get it from there. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Vivekanand, so much for joining us. I really had a lovely time interacting with you. And maybe I should go and, read and revisit your poems again after a month or two, because who knows, with each reading, my understanding of them sort of changes and my perspective influences my reading of your poetry as well. So thank you very much and take care.
Thank you so much. It was all conversations somehow reveal things that you haven't thought before. Like you can't really plan a conversation. So it
Yeah.
was really talking to you, and the questions were actually some of those things I didn't think about. I had to, and sometimes the same question, when you answer them different times, you say say them in a very different way yourself.
Yeah.
It is as surprising to you as it's surprising to other people, or just monotonous or whatever. But it was really nice, and I think it kind of helped me to understand some of those things. Thanks for this.
Thank you. Thank you, Vivekanand. Take care.
Take care. Yeah. Bye.